everyone. Welcome to this virtual workshop on how to create a research poster. So my name is Kavita Vudatha. I'm a second-year computer science student on the pre-medical track. And today the plan is to kind of take you through like the basics of how to create a research poster, what is on there, and also some tips to maybe enhance a poster that you're currently working on. And I'm going to kind of take you through one of my posters that I made in the past. It has been like about a year. So I will kind of take you through it and then explain like not more like in a general idea of what's expected and maybe also what's not, like what you shouldn't probably have on it. So that way you kind of get a good idea. And my plan is to kind of like go through each section. I'll kind of stop in between for questions. So either Magali or I will just kind of monitor the chat, or you can just like simply unmute yourself and speak up. That's also like very much welcome as well. So if you guys are able to see my screen, can you guys do like a really quick thumbs up? If you can't, like either put in the chat or, you know, speak up. Okay. So I'm going to assume that most of you guys can see this. If you can't, please let me know. So one of the basic ideas, like at least for a research poster that you really want to like keep in mind is always make sure that it comes back to like a central idea, your central idea for your project. So for example, in my project, I'll scroll a little bit. So in my project, I was focused on looking at like chemical and genomic therapies for pancreatic cancer. And so basically I kind of had to tie that every time I went through each section of my poster, I had to make sure that I kind of tied back to the central idea of like looking for a potential therapy apart from the ones that already exist. So one thing now I can kind of point out something that you should probably do better on, since this was one of my first posters. So my title, right, is Chemical and Genomic Inhibition of Aurora. So one of the first things I can point out is like, first of all, you may want to make a bigger, like nicer title, in my opinion. So it needs to be catchy, but at the same time, it also needs to be like informative enough that someone's going to stop and look at this. So like I had, again, changed this title later. So I had changed it to basically say like, you know, looking at the chemical and genomic advantages of inhibition of aurora kinase A in pancreatic cancer cells. So it kind of, again, gives you more insight of what am I working on, specifically what type of cancer and what type of protein am I working on. So then from there, let me see if I can see. Okay. So one of the first things you kind of want to think about when you go to your introduction, right? So the one thing that on a poster is that you do not want to put a lot of words on it, right? Because it's supposed to be very, very sharp and very concise to the point. Because in a normal conference, right, any type of conference, when they walk up, they're not going to have like all of their time to sit down and like talk with you or, you know, stand and talk with you. So it needs to be something that they can look at, get the gist out of, and walk away. And walk away with a good thought, right? So for example, in my introduction, I first stated what is the broad topic that I'm working on? I'm working on pancreatic cancer. What is that? And then I talk about a literature point. So the nice idea for the introduction, you can also kind of show, you know, how much research have you done on this in terms of literature research? Like, have you read about like what the types of research for example, here in pancreatic cancer? And based on that, how did you come up with your project? So I kind of structured my introduction in that manner. So I started with what is pancreatic cancer? Then, you know, I found that there was this type of research where they were looking exome sequencing and copy number of analysis. And after that, right, then I go on to look at the different proteins, right? Because the other thing is, why did I choose this protein? So you kind of have to answer like small little questions as you go, kind of based on your title. And it can be formatted in any way, but I find this like to be, in my opinion, one of the most like easier ways to kind of go through your project in a more simple manner. Also, when you present, it will make sense, right? You're going in a nice even flow. So then after that, I explain that there is other types of proteins such as KRAS, but then I explain why is aurora kinase A, right? Why is that just as important or even more important that I should be researching that? And I wanted to research and figure out if there is another way to decrease its expression. And so then I gave a little image. So one of the biggest things I always like to mention is to give a lot of like to give a lot of visualization to what you're talking about. Because if I didn't have this picture, then it would just be a whole bunch of words in the introduction, which I'm almost like 50% guarantee you nobody's going to take their time to read all of it. But if you give a visual, then they can kind of put the visual to the words and figure out, oh, okay, I get the gist of it, and they can keep going, right? Because again, they're not going to have so much time to kind of sit down and read everything. So then I gave a couple other like literature research that I found that kind of was gearing towards what I wanted, what type of research I wanted to do. So for example, looking at other like chemical inhibitors other than the ones that I kind of wanted to focus on. And then I kind of stated my proposal, what I wanted to do, like create another type of combination, a new, right, combination for pancreatic cancer cells. So underneath that, I put the abstract. Now this was, like I said, it happened, this poster was a little bit a while ago. So from my understanding, in most undergraduate research projects, you do not have to put the abstract in there. Generally, it's not even required because when you're standing up there, you kind of just like, you know, you're stating your project anyway. It also saves space, and it already even gives you space, right, for your introduction, that you can add more images, right, depending upon your project. But I would, in my opinion, I would definitely ask like the college that you're working, like you're doing your research in, to see if, you know, is that abstract absolutely required? But most of the time I would say no. So this is just like my abstract on my board, but you do not need to have that, but ask your college. So does anybody have any questions before I get going? Do we have any questions? Magali?
There's no question yet.
Okay, so I will keep going. So in the next section, so again, like your questions, your hypothesis, your materials, so those are pretty much like self-explanatory, right? These are things that you come up with at the beginning of your research project. So on the board, generally, obviously, I honestly just put it like word to word, like, you know, what I had originally thought of, and be as like descriptive as possible with your questions and hypothesis. So again, that it comes to the point. And then I feel like I don't need to explain the material section, but one thing I will say is that the formatting throughout the entire like poster, try to keep it as consistent as possible, right? So like if you're going, for example, going to use like bullet points, keep it at bullet points unless it's so necessary that you need to be using like numbered lists. So things like that, like it does make a difference when someone's looking at your poster overall as well. So this is something that I kind of did differently, and I definitely would recommend that other people try it as well. So instead of kind of making like a number list of the basic like ideas that I went through or the basic goals that I had in my project, I kind of made a flow chart instead. So first of all, the visualization, it kind of gives a nice visual to look at. And at the same time, it also gives an idea of where was I going through each step and what did I accomplish. So this is something that, you know, again, they can stop, look at it and think, hey, okay, I understand what you're doing. So, like scroll up. So in the data analysis section, honestly, it depends on what your project is, right? Like for my project, there wasn't so much, at least the first part of my project, this is only year one, but in the first year of my project, there wasn't a lot of like physical, like what I would like to call like Excel data that you turn into a graph. It's more along the lines of, you know, taking pictures of like my data analysis and kind of explaining it as I go. And so it really depends, but what I kind of like to do is like from figure 1 all the way down to figure 7, I kind of mimicked what I had in my methodology and kind of followed that same workflow. And then I put descriptions in each one. But again, it does differ by your by your presentation or by what your project is going for. But it's always nice to have like tiny other visuals as well. Like for example, this ladder is obviously not necessary to be here, but it's easy to explain like for particular pictures. Also, if you are taking a picture from the internet, please don't forget to cite it. It's like one of the weird things that we shouldn't be saying, but you should make sure that you do. So for example, also, the real world application section. So I put this here simply for the fact of why am I doing this, right? The biggest thing you need to think about, apart from like, you know, making sure that people get the concise concept of what your project is also why are you doing this, right? Why is it important why is your research so very important? How does it relate to the world, right? And so this area I kept to kind of explain that and how does my research kind of factor into the current research that they have available for pancreatic cancer. And I also talked about what I would do for further research and kind of giving a little bit more about literature review. So for example, I wanted to I wanted to use another drug, a chemical drug, because this project was mainly based upon genetic therapies. And so the future research that I wanted to look into was combining it with chemical therapies as well. So for example, I talked about cisplatin, which is a different type of drug to kind of decrease the inhibit Aurora kinase A expression in pancreatic cancer patients, right? So this is kind of taking the next step from like wet lab research to clinical research. So things like that will make a very large difference. And it also kind of tells them like, you know, how important and how your research can adapt to, you know, more clinical style studies as well. And then, let's see. So in the results section, so in this case, like a lot of people, it does vary based on your particular project. Again, I'm going to keep saying that quite a bit, but it really does. So in my case, for the results, I had a lot to talk about, but I kind of condensed it down into 4 different sections. So like, what did I do? What did I achieve? That was the whole point, is that you want to be as precise as possible. So they know that you did this, you did that, this is what you achieved. And the conclusion, well, that kind of is almost like the results. It's a little bit different in that you take your results and you conclude like, hey, did you first of all solve your hypothesis? But also like, you know, why, you know, apart from like, did I solve my hypothesis or not? But what was the main overarching idea, right? Was to try to find a method to decrease the expression. Did I do that or not? And I also kept a future directions here to basically talk a little bit more about what I would do with that cisplatin drug that I mentioned before in the real world applications. So for example, I talked about like how it interferes with DNA replication and how that was pretty much almost similar to what I was trying to mimic in my genetic therapy, and how I wanted to use that in synergy, which is basically like in combination. So that's kind of how like I structured my board. I did have a references page. That is pretty normal too, to have in a board. The only thing I would say is like the abstract is the only thing I definitely would not see on a normal undergraduate research board. But for this case, I did have one. Other than that, like just make sure that everything kind of is formatted. Like ignore this one because obviously I sent this to like a poster presentation, like a site to get it printed. But in general, because you are virtual, so they will see this like in depth. They'll be looking at it. So formatting does like appear a lot, you know, in detail this time. And also like there is another format for poster presentations. Sometimes they do like where they have just the introduction and maybe their data analysis, and then the rest, like the results, conclusion, more in-depth pictures, they just have a QR code. While you are very much welcome to do that, in my opinion, because it's already, most of the conferences at least are already virtual, I would not recommend to do that because they're just going to be scanning it on their computer screen and then get another link on their computer screen again. So I would just honestly kind of keep to doing a traditional style poster. So I understand that this is like more of a scientific style, but if anybody wants to see more of a humanities style poster, I do have an example and I can kind of go over that unless anybody has questions. So that is pretty much for me. If I went too fast, I can like go over other details if there's like a specific question to ask.
There's no question, but I just want to give like a tip or two. It's just like try to make sure that you catch like the reader attention. So like the name should be clear, concise, and like something really catchy so they can actually get interested by what you have to say, and make sure that it's large enough so people can actually read it and you won't just like scan through and not actually pay attention.
Right. And also, like I didn't mention before, but like this is something we shouldn't have to mention, but definitely check your spelling and grammar, right? Like don't forget the basic stuff. And also like the flow of the project. Definitely what I would kind of do is once you're done with your poster, kind of go through it and see if there's like a general flow, or give it to someone else who's never done your research or never done research before at all, and see if they can get a certain flow out of your project within, let's say, like at least 5 to 10 minutes. And if they're able to kind of understand the gist of it, then definitely you've made like a competent poster. So